Hey, welcome to season 2 of the Connected Life Book Club. This is our third week, so it's our third episode, I guess you could say. Are we going by episodes or are we doing weeks?
This is the third episode happening on the third week of the Connected Life Book Club podcast season 2.
There you go. We're doing chapters 5 and 6 today. And so we're excited to be diving in. And if you haven't yet subscribed to get these podcasts regularly, make sure you can do that.
You can subscribe at Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. And we have all the links to download for you right at connectedlifebookclub.com. I'm Summer. This is Candace. You ready to go?
So ready.
So ready. Chapter 5. What part of your imagination is the strongest? What part of your imagination has been the most neglected?
Okay, I was very into chapter 5. I like the imagination aspect, and I really, really like that she went into argument, like arguments as a imagination exercise, because I'm a slightly combative person, only in like a fun way.
Sure.
You know, like I would love to play the devil's advocate for anything, you know, just to try to imagine what the other argument would be, to try to see everything in a well-rounded way, which actually probably makes me less combative than most people because I don't stand by like, you know, if I have an opinion on something, not like biblical truth, just a heads up. But if I have like, you know, opinion on something, somebody could say, oh, well, this is how I see it. And I'm like, well, that's actually a pretty good argument, you know, but logically, I love to follow out those trains, those fields of vision, those ways that people see and experience things. And to put yourself in their shoes and to create it is a really fun form of imagination. But when it comes down to the question, okay, what part of your imagination is the strongest? So this is a funny question because the first couple things that came to my mind were worry. You know, like I can imagine if my husband doesn't pick up the phone and I call him twice, oh no, he got in a car accident. He's trapped. He's stranded somewhere. I mean, my imagination will run wild. But if it's like, hey, think of a children's story. It's like, 2 kids went into the woods and there was somebody baking goodies. Wait, no, that one's already happened. You know, like just, it's funny how your imagination grows where you train it to grow. And so if that means this is what I think people are saying about me, you know, and if you think, oh, if I wear that outfit, well, people are going to think this. They're going to, you know, imagine this about me. It's just practicing. It's growing that side of your imagination. As far as me, I think my imagination is the strongest when it comes to kind of like I was saying about argumentation and like the other side of any story. You know, that's why I like having all the facts. It's like if I'm in a situation where my husband, a friend might, you know, be afraid that I'm going to get mad at them for whatever reason, I would much rather have every single detail and be able to like really holistically get to the bottom of something versus like I was saying about those places where your imagination can run in not having all the details. Did that make sense?
Yeah, no, it totally did. And I guess I loved to hear how she talks about argument as being a form of imagination, but you're right. I think worry is just as much a part of that. And so one is freeing and one is a little bit more confining. But for me, I think it's funny because my imagination is strongest in the opposite of yours in the sense that I love making up kids' stories.
Yeah.
So when I thought of this question, where's my imagination the strongest? It was in that storytelling time before bed when my kids will throw out a character like a bunny, what color they are, and what the setting is. And, you know, we'll make up stories. And so we have an anthology of bedtime stories that we've created. And
there you go. And that's something you've been able to practice. You know, you've been able to stretch your imagination in that way.
Yeah. And so for me, it's that imaginary realm that I just feel so at home in with my kids, especially like watching them play and act and bring out that theater side. Like they can reenact a scene from Frozen over and over and over for hours. Like that is their play. And so watching that has just re-inspired me to travel back into that space that maybe I used to enjoy as a child. And so for me, that's what I always kind of classified imagination as. But where she says that what ignites our imaginations is as diverse as we are: nature, art, music, painting, sculpture, woodworking, knitting, storytelling, and even arguing. That was just like really eye-opening, because some of those things make sense. Storytelling, okay, yeah, I see imagination there. Art, for sure, I guess. Arguing, no. But, so like, I just think it's neat how our creativity comes out in so many different unique ways.
Right. Well, and I really, really like that, because it opened it up to a certain extent, an adult world of imagination. Mm-hmm. She does explain how a children's story kind of ignited this for her. But for some people, that just might not be the case. It might be, something that is a little bit more heady, or a little bit more sarcastic or witty, or, I prefer that type of imagination. I prefer going into those realms. And I think it's just as much imagination as, kids playing and, following up with kids' stories and things like that. So I appreciate that she opened that up.
And I think it's really important as adults that we embrace imagination, because it's not something we talk about a lot as adults. It's something we reminisce about as children. But I liked where she was talking about how imagination and seeing the different possibilities allows us to navigate this world better. She goes, there are no obstacles in God's world, just opportunities to choose a new path. And I think as adults, we get really bogged down with this barrier in my way. What am I supposed to do now? And we despair, instead of being like, cool, I wonder where God's taking me now.
Right.
And it's just a new turn in the maze or in the labyrinth, knowing that in the end, we're going to end up where we're supposed to.
That makes sense. I have a friend who's like she's a problem solver. She owns a small business. She has kids. She's just like constantly, her brain works in a very logical problem solving kind of way. And I love just to throw a wrench in her life sometimes when we're hanging out and like pitch some like really off kilter imaginary type situation. And she just looks at me like, is that real? Is that real? Or is that, what is this? And I'm like, I'll just play. Let's just, go down that road. Do you want to hear a slightly inappropriate story? I don't think it's inappropriate. It's maybe just like a little gross.
Yes.
Okay. So I was actually in the hospital room when she was having a baby. And it was her firstborn. And so after her baby was born, we were talking about like the newborn baby smell, right? You know the newborn baby smell? Yeah, Come on, that's a thing. That's a thing that people are like, yes, this like, oh, it's such a great smell. And they only have it for a little bit. That's the smell of your uterus.
Well, okay, when I think of newborn baby, I don't think like my baby just came out. I think
think about
they have baby powder and like
No. Then you don't get the newborn baby. You don't get the smell I'm talking about. It is literally like, they've washed the baby, whatever, but still, it's like that. Only newborns have that smell. Only newborns have that smell, and it's only for a couple months. But it's because it's the only place a newborn's been. So. And I told her that, and she believed me, like it was truth, which it was kind of just more of an imagination, funny story thing. And she asked a nurse about it, and the nurse was like, "I guess." Anyway, just a fun little imagination.
Oh, just so fun. Just horrified this mom. She's going to be holding her baby with like arms fully outstretched for the first couple of months of his life.
It's her own uterus.
I know, but it's weird.
This is a women's group. It's fine. All right. So, chapter 6. People often wonder. Sorry, this is a bad transition. People often wonder, why would God let bad things happen? Again, bad transition. I'm so sorry.
Thanks.
But it's a common thought. And I think for a lot of people that maybe have put faith on the back burner, this can be a hurdle that people sometimes go through. And I love how she switched the camera angle. And she says, look at it from a different perspective. Maybe where is God in this perspective? So how have you changed your perspective on a question like that? Why would God let bad things happen? Or how have you seen God work in disaster?
I think one thing that I've noticed is how much stronger community gets after a disaster. I mean, we can look at 9/11 and just the level of nationalism that came out of that that is just hasn't been seen in such a long time, and hasn't been seen since in the degree it was in those first couple of months, or even the burning of Notre Dame, and how many people like rallied together around that. And I think I first heard this concept, I think it was Mr. Rogers, that very wise man. He had said, how his mom always used to tell him, in the face of disaster, look for the helpers. Mm-hmm. It's like, who is on the outskirts right now rushing to help? Who are those heroes that are stepping up to just serve these strangers in many instances? And I think that is a silver lining in the midst of tragedy, is all the people who step outside of their own comfort zone for the sake of their neighbors in a way that you don't see in the day-to-day.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's huge. And I think too, my husband and I have this conversation all the time because he does not like pain. I mean, obviously, who likes pain? But like, we all know that it's a part of life, and he gets so frustrated. He gets so mad that is a part of life. And it's a little confusing to me because I'm more of a roll with the punches person. And I do see how those things can play a role in our own growth and development, our character development. I mean, when we go through a difficult situation, when we go through some of the hardest moments of our lives, even whether it's a chronic pain or the loss of a loved one or the loss of a business or a house or financial disruption in your life, how much people cling to God in those hard moments, because it just shows us that we are not strong enough, and it's a terrible reminder. But come on, how much do we get caught up in that lie, of like, I got this, whether we say it or not, whether we admit to it or not. I think subconsciously, when we are content, when life is stable, we tend to lose that tight grip on God. And so to have those disruptive moments, I think creates a really clear pathway. I mean, you hear it from people who are suffering from terminal cancer all the time, that they were never closer to God than in their last few years of life.
So I'm about to butcher another famous man's quotation.
Solid.
There was a quote by C.S. Lewis, which I've always loved, but I never remember correctly. In essence, it was that God whispers to us in our good times, speaks to us in the present. This is not at all close, but shouts to us in our pain. Like those moments, when we're hurting, it's almost like God is more present for us, speaking to us louder and clearer because all of a sudden our ears are attuned to him.
Right.
And if I think of it, I will find the actual quote and I will link it in the comments because I slaughtered it to such a big degree. But I think there's something to be said about that. We don't realize going into these situations, it's like, man, this is going to hurt. Can't wait to get closer to God.
Right.
Because I think as a parent, I used to always imagine, man, God, please don't ever let my kids get sick or die or anything, because I don't know. I don't think I could survive that. Like, I can't. And I was always honestly afraid of what that might do to my relationship with God. Like I saw myself getting so mad at him if he put me in a situation like that. And like, it's a hard thing.
Talk about imagination
to wrestle with. I'm like, and I'm trying to like hide that from God. Like, I don't want him to know that that's like a deep-seated fear of mine. I'm going to pull away if something hard happens. But then when Aurelia did go to the hospital and I was there, and all of a sudden you find the strength, resilience, and faith that you didn't know you had the capacity for. And you're like, wow, and your faith is made strong. And you're like, oh, I see how this works. I never envisioned that I would have succeeded in this before. So it's an interesting season, pain. But it's really amazing to see how God can use that.
Right, because the fact is we can't handle it. And when we do envision ourselves in it, I mean, we don't have the willpower to make it through those types of situations. But that's why God is so important. And that's why, it even says in the Bible that he's close to the brokenhearted, because it is his strength that keeps us going. And so, I thought that was really cool that she kind of flipped that on its head. And I love taking those moments, those classic questions, so to say, that people struggle with in their faith and looking at them from a totally different perspective. I mean, she even touches on that in the argumentative moment, chapter, or whatever, where there was a scholar that was looking at things from a totally different perspective, looking at a story from a totally different perspective, and like, hey, maybe this is what Jesus meant, you know, because I think the more we take things at, face value when they come from, when they don't come directly from God, the harder it is for us to draw closer to God. You know, when we take a pastor's interpretation of a story versus actually digging in and praying and meditating and, you know, coming closer to God and finding your own interpretation of that parable or of that story in the Bible. I just think that's really important.
Absolutely. 100%. So as we finish these 2 chapters here, we are brought to the practices that are built into the end of all of the chapters, which have been so rewarding.
And so many practices.
So all the practices. But, and some of them are easier than others to pull off. And so the next question is, which practice from this week's reading was the most helpful? Which was the most difficult to complete, and why?
I didn't get together with a group of friends to tell a story and rewrite all the Bible stories. I didn't do it.
No, you didn't. Well, isn't it? Is it?
That was chapter 5.
It was okay.
Yeah, it was like, have some fun. Was
that a children's book one?
Well, they kind of did. She did both.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, there was like a read a children's book and then like get people together and like illustrate a Bible story.
Cool. I read a children's book.
Good for you.
But I do that every day.
I was going to say also no fair because you actually have children's books in your house.
All the children's books.
I hung out with kids. They're like 13, but we didn't read a book, but we watched a movie together.
So I would say that one by default was the easiest for me, but I definitely got more out of the other one. But you were saying, did you get a chance to explore chapter 6's practice?
Well, so the finger labyrinth or the actual labyrinth, I thought that was really interesting because I can understand how, you know, just kind of like following a path and how it's a little bit of a mindless thing, but you still have a purpose in what you're doing. And so I looked for a labyrinth near me and I found that there's like 3 within a mile from my house.
Love it.
I had no idea. I had literally no idea. And I found it on labyrinthlocator.com in case you want to find a labyrinth near your house. I don't know. That might be a fun little like group activity.
Sure.
I don't know. Is that supposed to be a group activity or is that supposed to be a solo thing?
No, I think all of these practices are encouraged to be done with groups as well. And so if you're part of a local community group and you want to get together and do labyrinthlocator.com, I will say one of the things that she mentioned that I would just kind of throw this disclaimer out there. So labyrinths are used by a lot of different spiritual practices. And so whereas some of the labyrinths that you're going to find are part of churches, especially like Episcopalian churches, there are other ones that are designed to be like, I don't know.
More secular.
On a different spiritual wavelength. And so she recommends, if you can, go to one of these church labyrinths. And I think that there's something to that. This book is just stretched me and challenged me in a lot of ways that I didn't see coming.
Yeah.
And I know I've shared that before, but this whole thing about labyrinths, I'm like, I am totally lost. Like, what does this even mean? Like this labyrinth idea kind of seemed like out there. And so I started doing more research after I read this chapter. And like, yeah, like I get it. I get the idea of as you follow this path, it's convoluted and it's twisty and it's turny and you don't on the outset know exactly where this is going, but you know where it's gonna lead and it's gonna take you to that center. And then you can trust it. You know that no matter how difficult and unknown it seems right now, that when we follow God, we're gonna end up where we're meant to be. And so one of the challenges was to print a labyrinth, and I couldn't find one I liked. So I taught myself how to draw a labyrinth, and I have had so much fun with this. I ended up wood burning it onto like a little piece of wood, and I just had, I had all the fun with this.
Overachiever.
No, but I have used this like every single day since, as I've prayed at night. Like it's helped me so much because I feel like in my prayer time, you want to try it?
Yeah.
Okay. In my prayer time, one of the hardest things for me is focusing. I feel like half my prayers, like, dear Lord, please forgive me for losing my attention again. And Lord, please help me focus and stop picturing things for my day and things I want to buy on Amazon. And so using this, for me, it's been like, okay, I pray to just let everything go and help focus. And I get to the center and I like hold my finger there and I keep my eyes open and I have a focal point and it helps me just really focus. And then I take whatever it is that I gleaned from the prayer and it's like working backwards and like back to the real world and taking that with me. It's just been such an interesting practice that I've never been exposed to before.
Okay,
and
I keep going over the lines.
Yeah.
I need to focus too much on that labyrinth. Maybe I need to wear my glasses.
So that was just a really fun new concept for me that I ended up applying in a way I never thought I would.
Well, even when she mentioned it in the introduction, and I was like, labyrinth, why does she keep bringing that up? Like, what is this? Are we going on walks? Is it the getting lost? Is it, because I'm picturing like
David Bowie? I mean, I don't know.
Hedge labyrinths, right? I mean, that would be cool, I think, to find something like that. But obviously, I've always heard of them as like a maze and not like a clear, direct path that goes toward a center and then you come back out or whatever. So, yeah, I thought that was really interesting.
That was probably my favorite practice.
Yeah,
I thought that one was really
that's awesome.
Cool.
Well, as you start doing practices, as you are finding things that you love doing in all the different, I mean, she has so many different ideas of things that you can do to stretch your creativity, to draw closer to God in, those moments of wonder. I would love if you would share those in the comments. Just tell us the things that you're doing. Share photos, even videos. You do whatever. I mean, we want to be involved with you. So make sure you post those in our Facebook group.
Yes. And if you have not already subscribed, get each podcast as it comes out. You get notifications if you subscribe through the Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify. All the links are at connectedlifebookclub.com. See you next week.